If you've looked into evals for validating and testing your AI tools, you've probably seen that they come in one of two flavors. They're either bolted onto an existing tool that you need to do a full integration with, or they're optimized for single prompt response type of workflows. But what if what you want to test isn't meant to return an answer after only a single prompt? If you're building agents or MCP servers, you know that you can't just evaluate a single prompt. You need to be evaluating multi-turn conversations. And even those can't be scripted because those conversations develop dynamically based on tool calls and agent responses. This is why I built EvalRPG. EvalRPG is a multi-turn conversational simulator using synthetic personas to evaluate agents, not prompts. So let's take a look at what this does in practice. For this example, I'm going to test an MCP server that allows an agent to process returns for customers. Just a typical kind of agentic customer service workflow. It has tools like lookup order, and the main tool that it needs to call here is going to be to process a return and get back a tracking link. And for the sake of this demo, the MCP server contains a bug, which will cause it to error out if the return reason is because the item was not as described. So this is already describing a workflow that we can't test with a single prompt. We need to actually run conversations over time. So let's take a look at what EvalRPG does. So your first configuration option here is your LLM config. This is basically configuring the LLM for all of the different tools that it needs to run to do its job. So you have an optional base URL here if you're using something like Light LLM, but any OpenAI compatible model will work here. You have your API key and the default model that you want to use. This is the model that you're using not for your agent, but for all of the different calls that EvalRPG needs to run. The next step, and this is probably the most important part, is the persona configuration. This is actually how you're going to create the different conversations to test out your tool. So I'm going to paste in a prompt here, and this prompt is customers who want to return a product they purchased within the last 2 weeks from Eval Corp, the #1 seller of lamps. Each customer has an email address, a purchase date, an alphanumeric order number, and a reason for the return based on some categories. Now what you need to put in here is only the unique details. You'll see that everything I said the customer needs to have is specific for my example. Under the hood, we'll already determine things like names, personalities, ways of like different types of speech. All of that will be handled for you. You only need to put in here the things that are specific to your test case. And then we put the number of personas we want to generate. I'll just say 4, and we can go ahead and generate these personas. Now this will take a couple seconds, and as soon as it finishes, it'll direct us to the persona screen to see what we developed. So awesome, we have our 4 personas, an analytical IT professional named Lisa, a friendly teacher named Mike, and so on. And what we have here is both the description of the user with the information we specified, but also just some interesting ways of speaking, things to keep these conversations relatively unique. And then we have an opening message of how they're going to start the conversation. So, okay, perfect. I was going to say, we did get one that's going to trigger the bug down here, but if we didn't get a conversation we'd like, we can actually edit any of these. I'd like to initiate a return for a lamp and we can just say something like, for a lamp I just bought. And now we have edited this, and that's how we can go in and customize if they didn't exactly meet what we wanted to test. So the next thing we're going to fill out here is the agent config. This is where you're actually going to put in the tools of what's going to be under test. Now the agent config, I'm going to keep pretty brief. Just going to say you're a customer service agent representing Eval Corp, the #1 seller of lamps. Why am I keeping the system prompt brief? Because what I'm really testing is the MCP server. We've done a lot of experiments recently with MCP servers, and I am really coming around to the idea that a well-built and well-described MCP server is just as powerful, if not more powerful, than a system prompt. Now the MCP server, as I said, is just running using FastMCP locally. So I'm just going to paste in the URL for that. You have another option to input a model here. This is if you want to use a different model for your agent than you're using for the rest of the app. I'm just going to leave that as 4.0. And the last thing we need to fill out is your eval config. This is how you know the test is complete. So completion criteria is what ends this test successfully. So in this case, what I want to track is that they should get back a URL to track their return. And then I'm going to point out, never ask for this directly, because sometimes the personas have a tendency to ask directly for what they need to satisfy their criteria. We don't want them to do that. Number of runs per persona. This is a great way to combat non-determinism a bit, but we're just going to leave it as 1. And then conversation limit is how many messages are we going to allow the agent to reply with before we just say this is a failure. For the sake of this demo, we're going to drop this down to something like 5. And now we're ready to run our eval. So I'm going to go ahead and click run. And what you're going to see is a progress bar, and you can watch the conversations happen in real time. So that first one hit our bug. Let's see, this one should work well though. And obviously, simple agent, simple hard-coded MCP server, these are going very fast. Depending on what is under test, these can obviously be much slower. But we're almost done here, so I'm not even going to fast forward this. Cool. So after the conversations are done, each one is evaluated. Just for a quick summary. We're going to do more with this later, but for now it's just summarizing the conversation. And it's going to dump us out to the results of our test run. So what we can see here is our different personas that ran, how many turns the conversation took. Turns are effectively an agent response. A turn is both a query and a response. The duration the conversation took, all of these were extremely quick. And then whether or not it succeeded. And this is what's great is we can jump in and look at one. So we see this conversation failed. And yep, I'm sorry, there's an issue processing the return. So now we know that something about this conversation was a failure. We get a summary for what happened in the conversation, just an AI typical summary, and then we get the persona that was under test. And we can look at any of these and see how the full conversation went. Like here was one that was successful. Yep, we got our tracking link. So, and then, of course, afterwards, we can download our results. This downloads a YAML file that actually contains everything we just filled out, the test runs, the personas, and all of your settings with the exception of the LLM config because there's potentially an API key in there. And if you download that and then you come back to this tool later, this tool has no long-term memory. So you can use that YAML file, upload it, and get right back into any evaluation you would run. This could be useful. It's not as useful for just kind of reviewing test runs, but I think it could be really useful if you spend any significant amount of time crafting your personas. Like perhaps you come in here and you want really detailed opening messages, then that would be a good use case for downloading the results of your run. So that's it. This is EvalRPG. I hope you find it useful.